Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I have a very special episode for you today. It's a nice long one all about onboard UFO encounters. This one is called Onboard an Extraterrestrial Craft. 5 fantastic first-hand cases. I love this aspect of UFO encounters. I think it's the cutting edge of UFO research. It's cases like these that are absolutely undeniable. People could not possibly be misperceiving because they are actually inside these craft. The 5 cases I've chosen for you today are extraordinarily extensive. In every single one of them, the witnesses received quite a bit of information. Some of them actually hold fairly long conversations with the ETs. And also, of these 5 cases, 3 are multiple witness cases. And really, another one does have an outside witness, so one technically is just a single witness case. These cases do come from quite a wide variety of areas, including Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Mexico, and Chile. I really am very interested in these kinds of cases. I think they contain the most information. They really answer a lot of the questions that surround this subject, such as who are these ETs, where do they come from, and why are they here? And yeah, these cases are very, very extensive and do involve a wide variety of extraterrestrial types. So let's just get started. In the first case I'd like to talk about, I call I Have No Fear. This one occurred on February 4, 1974, in a very remote area of Sonora, Mexico. This involves a family of 3 who were taken on board. It was initially shrouded in missing time, but after a hypnosis session, the details came back, and it's quite an extraordinary case with some really profound revelations from the ETs. This case comes from Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and it first appeared in his private publication, The Proceedings of the Rocky Mountain Contactee Conference. This case involves a family, a father, mother, and son, all of who shared an onboard encounter. They are anonymous and are known only by their initials, RD, GD, and MD. For the purposes of this video, I will call them Roger, Mary, and David. David is the son, and he was 13 years old at the time of this encounter. The 3 of them were on vacation in Sonora, Mexico, and in February of 1974, they decided to visit the remote and somewhat primitive Indian village called El Desemboque. This is located along the Gulf of California in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, which is quite vast. So to get there, they left the town of Coborca and headed southwest towards this village, and then began to drive through the back country. They drove throughout the day, and when night arrived, they found themselves in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest ranch about 30 miles away. They were still quite some distance from this village, so they parked their truck at the foot of a small rocky hill, cooked dinner over a campfire, and went to bed in the camper shell on the back of their pickup truck. It was about 2 hours later, again on the night of February 4, 1974, that something very strange happened to them. And I'll just quote the father, Roger, directly. As he says, "We were jolted awake by beeping noises that sounded electronic. The noises were clear and sharp, about 1 second apart. We looked out of the windows to locate the source of the noise. The night was clear and moonlit, but because of the heavy desert brush, we could see only 40 or 50 feet. The beeping continued." So Roger wondered if this beeping noise was because he had forgotten to turn off the radio or the CB in his truck, but he checked them and both were off. So he wondered then if perhaps they weren't as isolated as he thought, and that there might be some kind of relay station near their camp. He vowed to check the next morning, but throughout the night he awoke a few times to still hear this strange beeping noise. Now the next morning he and his son climbed up to the top of this small rocky hill, and there was nothing visible for miles around them except the vast featureless Sonoran Desert. Now weirdly, as they ate breakfast, Roger's wife Mary announced out of the blue that she felt as though that they had perhaps been visited by a UFO that night. She had no reason to say that, but later that morning she began her menstruation cycle. This was sudden and unexpected, and that was it, or so they thought. But as Roger says, we sometimes wondered about the strange events of that night in the desert. But how does one find answers to this type of question? Had we been visited by UFOs? It was 5.5 years later that Roger felt compelled to write to researcher Leonard Stringfield, and he asked him in his letter, "Do you ever hear about beeping noises in connection with UFOs?" Stringfield requested a meeting with the family, and after meeting with them, he suggested hypnotic regression, so they all agreed to give it a try. And under hypnosis, they remembered an onboard experience. Roger recalled that all three of them woke up with a sense of anxiety. Then, without warning, 4 or 5 short figures appeared and began to walk around the back of their truck. As Roger says, they were about 4 feet tall and dressed in spacesuits with helmets. One of the figures places his face against the right side of the window. The face has slanted eyes. So this was under hypnosis, and the next thing Roger recalled seeing under hypnosis was a blindingly bright light in front of him, slightly above the ground. 2 of these little short figures are leading him by his elbows towards this light. The next thing he knows, he is underneath it. And as Roger says, it is huge. The body of the craft is at least 15 feet above the ground. The bottom is curved. 4 legs arch down and support the craft. Something is still at each elbow guiding me. A stairway extends from the belly of the craft to the ground. We walk towards it. Now Roger was feeling some fear at this time, but the next thing he knows, he's actually inside this craft, and all of his fear was gone. Again, as Roger says in his own words, "I am walking up a curved stairway. I have been in the craft for some time. For the first time, I experience color. Everything is light blue. Also, for the first time, I have lost my fear. I neither fear for myself nor for my wife or son who are not with me. I must explain the blue. Everything is made of a material that is solid, but which is somewhat translucent. I am standing in a room. Everything is still blue. To my right, the structural ribs of the craft come out of the floor and the wall and arch overhead. In the wall is a rectangle of very dark blue, about 2 feet by 3 feet. I think it is a star map, as I can see many yellow dots on it. By my left side is a desk attached to a vertical wall. Before me is the fuzzy outline of a man about my size. I feel that he is the commander of the craft. I have no fear of this man. I think of my wife and son, but also have no fear for them. I am quite content to be here." So at this point, Roger knew he was having a very strange experience, and he stared at the star map and tried real hard to memorize it, but he found that it all became a blur in his mind. It was at this point that the commander of this craft gave Roger a message. As Roger says, "He doesn't actually speak to me, but I know what he is saying. The picture he gives me mentally is in definite black and white. The skyscrapers are all black. Behind them, the sky is a brilliant white. I know, it is an atomic explosion. I think the place is New York, but I am not sure. The picture is a warning." So the figure continued to speak telepathically to Roger, and as he says, "There is another message. The figure tells me that my wife and I are handling our chore correctly. I think he means about building the cabin and storing food there." So throughout this hypnosis session, Roger did experience lapses of awareness. The next thing he knew, he was back in this same room with the commander, again trying to study the star map and remember it. He did recall seeing 3 stars on the left side with sort of tails trailing behind them, but the commander then told him to forget the map, as that was not why he was here. He then showed him another unusual looking map which lay on the desk beside them. And as Roger says, I feel that it has been there all the time, and if I hadn't been looking at the star map, I would have noticed it. The map on the table is one of the reasons for me being here. The commander is now beside me. We are leaning over the desk studying the map. He is now less fuzzy. He is wearing tight red pants. The rest of him is still unclear. I recognize the region of the map. It is the Eastern Mediterranean area. There are two regions on the map that impress me, the Fertile Crescent and north of the Black Sea. The map is strange. As I look at it one time, it is very detailed with the names of each city, village, and mountain range, and is in color. But as I look at it again, it is very plain, with only the Fertile Crescent and the Black Sea outlined. It is as though these are the important points he wants me to see. Roger did notice an X located at the extreme top of the Fertile Crescent, at which point the ET told him, quote, "An important battle will be fought there." As Roger says, I am surprised, because I think the next battle in that region would be fought on one of the borders of Israel. The battle will trigger a later battle or catastrophe. When the first battle occurs, we should prepare. Then the commander points to an area north of the Black Sea. On a river is a dot with a dark circle around it and the word Kiev. The commander tells me that this is by far the most dangerous place. I picture rockets coming from there, but that may not be the true picture. I also picture an assassination. The commander says that bad things are happening in Kiev, and I must stop them. So at this point, Roger protested and told the man, quote, "I know nothing of Russia and have absolutely no control over what happens there." Per Roger, the man seemed to become irritated and told him, if the bad things are not stopped, a catastrophic war will occur. Roger then asked when, and the man replied, in 6 years. That is really all Roger was able to recall. He woke up the next morning with no memory of the event other than that strange beeping noise. Now his wife Mary also went under hypnosis, and she could remember very little. Really, the only memory she was able to bring back was standing alone under the craft and looking up at the open hatch. Now their son David, age 13, did recall some impressions of the interior of the craft. He said he saw a being with an abnormally long head, huge eyes, gray skin, about 4 feet tall. He also recalled seeing a sort of crystalline device, which he said showed him letters that he felt he was supposed to learn. Now the catastrophic event that the ETs told Roger about, that was supposed to occur 6 years later, was supposed to occur in 1980. Interestingly, the Iran-Iraq conflict escalated into outright war in September of 1980 and endured for almost 8 years, finally ending in August of 1988 with no clear winner, but the loss of over 500,000 lives. Now following this hypnosis session, Roger and his family are really still left with more questions than answers. As Roger says, were my wife, my son, and I actually taken on board a UFO that night in 1974? Or did my son and I create for ourselves the story? I have asked myself this question countless times. What an amazing case that is, and you can see how profoundly it affected the witnesses for a very long time. I know there are people who are skeptical that cases like these even take place, but the fact is there are so many cases. It's not just 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 or even 100 or 1,000. It's closer to tens of thousands with good indications that there are millions of these kinds of cases. And when there's a multiple witness case, it becomes even harder to deny. But you can see the witnesses themselves struggled with this, with what happened to them. And you can understand why. If they themselves have a hard time understanding and processing an experience like this, I think it's just as hard for people who haven't had that experience. This is why I like doing this research, because I think these cases are important. A lot of people out there are having these encounters, and I think the evidence for them is increasingly undeniable. Because here's another case, equally astonishing, and also a multiple witness case. This is another one you probably haven't heard before. I think most of the cases in this episode you probably haven't heard. I'd be surprised if you did. But this one is amazing. I call it, I Had a Role to Play. This one occurred some evening in June of 1975 in Minong, Wisconsin. And yeah, a multiple witness case involving a young, newly engaged couple who had initially a missing time encounter, started at flashbacks, and did elect to go under hypnosis. Now, I know hypnosis is controversial, but what's really interesting is these people are recalling essentially the same details. And done correctly, hypnosis has been shown to be able to accurately retrieve people's memories. At any rate, I think you'll find this case quite interesting because once again, the witnesses did receive some very compelling information from the ETs themselves. It was a wonderful day in June 1975 for Dennis Murowska and Karen Klinger. The young couple was deeply in love and Dennis had just proposed to Karen. She, of course, accepted his proposal and they decided to take a short drive around a small lake near Minong, Wisconsin that evening. And as they're driving around this little lake, this is when they noticed that the moon was very low in the sky, but then suddenly, without warning, it was gone. So this was very puzzling to them. As Karen says, there was no cloud cover or anything, so we were very confused. We were like, what happened? Where did it go? So they drove back to this cabin where they were staying with Dennis's mother and a few other family members and friends. They then walked down to a small pier by the lake, and this is when a UFO appeared. As Karen says, all of a sudden, something that looked like a bright orange star zipped above the trees over our heads and began to dart around in diagonals from one end of the horizon to the other, like a falling leaf. This bright orange star that was along the horizon of the trees on the other side of the lake zipped right to the top of our heads, and we looked up. There were two other identical objects that appeared. Her fiancé Dennis confirms this, as he says, there was one star-like object. It was a little bit brighter than a star, kind of an orangey color that seemed to stand out from the others a bit. I really didn't think anything of it at the time, but my focus kept going back and forth to that particular object, and after a while, I noticed some odd things about it. I think the best way I could describe the flight is like that of a dragonfly. It would zip here, stop, zip here, stop, zip, 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 real fast. And I was like, what are we watching? I was fascinated by it. I just didn't want to stop looking at it. I was just glued to it. And we finally started calling my folks down from the cabin so they could watch. So they did that, and now all 6 adults watched as these objects moved closer and appeared larger and larger. All of them were amazed to see what appeared to be a single object split into 3 and then rejoin as one. At this point, one of the witnesses pulled out a high-beam lantern and flashed it 4 times at one of the objects, which responded by flashing exactly 4 beams of light onto the ground. So that impressed them. They flashed the lantern again in a certain sequence, and the craft returned the flashes in the same exact sequence. So they realized at this point that they were seeing something very unusual. Dennis's mother in particular became quite afraid, hysterical with fear, and started screaming, "They're going to kill us." As Dennis says, my mother was a little scared. By this time, we knew we were watching something that we had no explanation for. It was really strange, and definitely appeared to be intelligently controlled. After just a few minutes, the objects moved off behind some trees and were gone. The sighting, they estimated, lasted about a half an hour. But as Karen says, then we went back in and drank a bottle of wine. They talked about what they had seen, and everyone confirmed each other's testimony. They all described seeing the exact same thing. Says Karen, we looked around everywhere the next day, but never found anything. So that was it, or so they thought. And as time passed, they never gave much thought to the sighting, other than it was unexplained. But as the years went by, they did occasionally discuss it, and one thing that puzzled them was the apparent disappearance of the moon. They knew it had been hanging low in the sky and then suddenly it was gone. And in fact, during the sighting with the rest of their family, the moon had apparently already set. And the more they thought about this, the timeline just didn't make sense. What happened to the time between when the moon was in the sky and when it was gone? As Karen says, we figured it would take at least an hour and a half for the moon to set from the angle we saw it at before it instantly disappeared. And so, at the very least, there was an hour of time that elapsed where we were unaccounted for. When both of us finally discussed this 2 years ago, this was 1994, and realized what had happened, I felt almost nauseated at the thought of it. It was around this time that Karen heard about the so-called Allagash abduction case investigated by Raymond Fowler. He wrote a book about it. This occurred actually in June of 1975 in Maine, the same time as Karen and Dennis's encounter. The Allagash case involved 4 men who saw 3 objects on a rural lake in upper Maine. They also experienced about an hour of missing time. They also had shown a flashlight at the object. So hearing all this, Karen was really struck by the similarities to her own encounter. As Karen says, after first seeing this, I felt sick. I thought, oh my God, the case has such eerie similarities to our story. And that's what prompted me to see a hypnotherapist. They reported seeing the exact same things we did. Now, years later, she and Dennis had divorced, and they hadn't spoken for a year except to handle the custody of their child. But apparently Dennis also saw this same program about the Allagash case, and the next time he saw his ex-wife Karen, he brought up their encounter and asked her if she might consider hypnosis. So they both agreed to contact the Center for UFO Studies, and they were referred to a psychotherapist by the name of David Clayton, PhD. He agreed to see them, they scheduled an appointment, and Dr. Clayton said he would hypnotize them. Dr. Clayton had initially been very skeptical of such claims of onboard encounters, but he said that after the sessions, he became much more convinced. Now, Dennis did originally insist upon being anonymous. He's a physics teacher at a big school. He didn't want to discuss the experience publicly, but more recently he has gone public. And under hypnosis, he recalled that while driving around the lake, a very bright light shone down on their car. As Dennis says, we both got these images of a grid-like pattern, almost a primitive type of structure, almost like a dirigible or something. Now, Dennis couldn't recall much other than that, but he was left with the sense that the encounter was benevolent in nature and did involve a message of warning. Now, Karen is also a teacher. Under hypnosis, she recalled that when this light hit her car, it was so intense, she thought she had actually fainted. And going under hypnosis was a huge turning point for her. It was very frightening for her, and it took multiple sessions to remember what happened. But as Karen says, there was a feeling of being enveloped by an intense white beam. I was facing a form that had static electricity around it. I received messages telepathically of what it was trying to convey. The message was that the world was on the verge of an environmental catastrophe, and I had a role to play in the rebuilding process. They told me they weren't going to allow the people to destroy themselves. They told me to feel free to tell anyone I wanted to tell about it, but to be forewarned that I would not be taken seriously, which generally happens to be the case. So that's all Karen really tells about what happened. She did share her experience with family members who were understandably shocked. And as Karen says, whenever I've brought it up, my parents get funny looks on their faces, and they kind of get squirmy and try to change the subject right away. I don't discuss it with them anymore because they're so judgmental about it. They're kind of like, aren't you taking this kind of far? So both Karen and Dennis agree that the purpose of the encounter was not to hurt them, but actually to help humankind. Both came away from the experience with the same message, that the fate of the planet is intertwined with other alien worlds, and that the people of Earth are not doing a good job taking care of Earth. Karen does have some advice for other people who are going through this experience. As she says, if you feel that this has happened to you, by all means, do whatever it takes to uncover the information. because it's worth the risk. Karen hopes that by coming forward, it will encourage other people to share their own experiences with UFOs and extraterrestrials. Now, if you wait to the end of this video, you can see Karen and Dennis tell their story in their own words. There's a testimony at the very end of this episode. So if you get a chance, check that out. A really amazing case, and kudos to both the witnesses for having the courage and strength to step forward, because again, most don't. I do hope you check out their first-hand interview at the end of this episode, because it's really interesting to hear from the witnesses firsthand. So now let's move to the next case. This one is really amazing. What I like about this case is it is a multiple witness case involving a young married couple. And this one is also interesting because they did not use hypnosis to recall their encounter. And it actually happened as a result of doing CE5 work. By CE5, I mean they meditated to try to reach out to the ETs and initiate an encounter. And it was wildly successful beyond their wildest imagination. They absolutely were taken on board a craft, and their stories corroborate down to the tiniest detail, and they actually have proof that they were taken on board because the woman was suffering from a medical condition that was chronic and was actually healed of her chronic condition, as we shall see. So I call this one, My Whole Concept of the Universe Changed. This occurred one evening in 1975 in eastern Pennsylvania. This case comes from researcher Eugenia Macer Story, who published it in Pursuit magazine, volume 13, number 4, in the fall of 1980. This case involves a couple from Pennsylvania who insist upon being anonymous. In fact, they had no intention or interest in going public whatsoever, but were tracked down by Eugenia, who heard about the case from a friend of the couple. Eugenia has given the couple the pseudonyms Frank and Alice Johnson. Now, technically, this case is what we call a CE5, a human-initiated UFO encounter. The couple had long been interested in psychic abilities and the paranormal, and one day in 1975, Frank decided to see if he could use telepathy to call down UFOs and communicate with the ETs. He had become somewhat depressed with life and felt like he wanted to leave the earthly plane, so this was why he was doing this. As Frank says, I wanted very much to make contact. I was very much into astronomy at the time and studying the constellations. So he meditated, and to the surprise of them both, they began to see unexplained lights over the Mount J area. This is probably Jack's Mountain. It's the only mountain in Pennsylvania beginning with a J. So this was not far from where they had a small cottage house. And they'd see these lights, and they would usually stay among the mountain peaks, and each time Frank would rush out and try to contact them. As he says, I was seeing lights once or twice a week over the highest peaks. I kept trying to make contact by flashlight every time I'd see a UFO in the sky. Then, one evening, the contact Frank had been seeking finally occurred. As Frank says, I think we were in bed, just about to fall asleep. All of a sudden, we were compelled to go outside. It was very calm. I'd wanted to make contact, and I wasn't nervous at all. We saw a round, luminous object up near the electric light pole, and then we just felt like we were sucked into it. We were definitely floated up towards the entrance to the ship. Now, Alice confirms her husband's testimony, but actually adds a little more detail. She remembers that they suddenly sat up in bed when the room filled with light. As Alice says, Frank was sitting beside me, and then we were up out of bed facing the door. I could see through the door the shadow of a figure about 6 feet tall. Then the door was open, and we were out on the porch. The ground was very white, like snow, and on the road through the trees, I could see a vehicle of some sort, about the size of an average car. They were picking up samples of rocks and stuff and putting them in containers. Then we saw a light over the side of the house. We were lifted and somehow floating. I couldn't feel the sensation of somebody pulling me up under the arms, but I just felt very light. As we were approaching the craft, a circle of light seemed to open, and I knew that we were going in there. Now later, both Frank and Alice would consider the possibility that they had perhaps a shared out-of-body experience, but some of the details they describe point to this being a physical experience, as we shall see. But Frank's next memory was being inside the craft in a strange room. As he says, we entered up into this chamber. There was no one in the chamber at first. It was circular and we were floating, bobbing in midair. Suddenly doors opened and beings in suits came out. They had eyes, nose, and ears, but not as much of a mouth as ours. They were bluish silver. There was a female. She grabbed Alice and took her into another area, and I stayed behind. There were two men. They showed me some star tracks, and about the universe, and how much more there is beyond us. So the ETs were communicating with Frank, and also with Alice, telepathically. The two men with Frank continued to teach him about the subject that interested him most, astronomy. As Frank says, there were 3 charts on the wall. Once we started talking, others started gathering. I guess these were the crew. I told them I was studying astronomy. On the charts, I did recognize the Milky Way in the midpoint range of the stars, and I pointed that out. Then they showed me another star region, but the captain, the one in charge, he wasn't really concerned with the stars. He was just concerned with trying to enlighten me. He told me that there's more beyond the star regions in this physical dimension than I could imagine. And that's when my consciousness, my awareness became expanded. There are other dimensions, physical dimensions, not just this one physical dimension. They use this kind of subtlety, and it was very interesting. I picked up telepathically that there were other dimensions. It came to me that I was locked into this 3-dimensional mode of thought, escaping to other planets via flying saucers, which is wrong. There are other dimensions. These beings, I think, come from another sub-level dimension to what we call the astral plane. So Alice at this time was having her own experience. She was separated from her husband, but like Frank, she first remembered just floating in this first chamber. As Alice says, once we were inside, we just sort of floated there in this little room, bobbing around in the air. I don't know if we were being decontaminated or what. I was half asleep. Then the partition opened, and 2 men and a girl came into the room. She motioned to me to follow her. I went down a curved hall, following her. It was curved at the top, and the walls were luminous panels. These panels lit up for us automatically as we went down the hall. They were all wearing the same sort of suit. There were bulb-like things over her eyes, rounded at the top and somewhat rounded at the bottom, and I figured it must be something to protect the vision. But she knew I was looking her over. For Alice, this woman had a very small nose, not much of a mouth. She was taller than Alice, but definitely female. She had a long face. The blue suit went up around her head, covering everything but her face. And the room she found herself in reminded her of a medical clinic, complete with an examination table and screens on the walls. And as Alice says, she lifted her hand, and I was just lifted up and set on the table. I felt her telling me telepathically that it was all right, that she was not going to hurt me. She brought an instrument with a light on it down towards me and began to run the light over my body. As she began to run the lights over me, I realized she was checking this on a wall panel. I looked up at the wall, and I could see the ridges around my skull, and the outline of my head, and the shape of my brain. And then as she moved the light down my tongue, when I swallowed, this was all projected in blues and purples. And I thought, wow, that is fabulous. As she went down, I could see my lungs taking in the air and my heart pumping. The deeper blue of the blood was going down the aorta, and I thought this must be done by some sort of heat process. She responded to that thought. She told me telepathically, yes, something like heat radiation. As the light moved still further down, I saw my stomach partially full, and then she went down over the intestines and into the genital area, and when she got there, I just couldn't help but feel curious. She had heard my question and stopped for a minute to ask exactly what I meant. And then she told me that the problem could be fixed easily. As it turned out, from a very young age, Alice had suffered from bleeding ovaries. This caused her painful cramps, abnormal menstrual cycles, and doctors advised her that she could not have children, told her that she was in effect barren. But now, while being physically examined by the ETs, she wished that the ETs would fix this problem. And the lady apparently heard her and said, "Wait until we're finished." The woman then moved to a desk and appeared to fill out paperwork. She then moved a rack of instruments over and, choosing a sort of drill-like instrument, placed it about 6 inches above Alice's abdomen. At this point, Alice could feel a tingling and stinging sensation. The woman apologized for the pain, but then traced Alice's abdomen with the instrument. Alice believed that she was following the fallopian tubes and going down towards the cervix. The lady brought out another smaller instrument and used it briefly, and then said, "That's it." To Alice, it felt just like a doctor's visit. Says Alice, "I felt funny when I sat up because I was tingling. It wasn't painful at all, but I could feel a strong tingling in my abdominal area. After she helped me off the table, I followed her down the hall. So she was taken to what looked like a sort of elevator and then found herself in another room where she was reunited with her husband. As Alice says, we walked into a room where 5 or 6 of the alien men were standing around Frank, casually talking telepathically. They were questioning him, and he was talking about fuel. They asked what sort of fuel we use for cars, and before he could answer, one of them just picked it up out of his mind and said, "Fossil fuel, decomposed animal matter." This was all telepathic. We got into a real conversation with the aliens. Frank was asking questions about pollution and ecological balance, and they really surprised us by saying, "Have faith in people. Human beings are farther advanced than you think. At least you are aware. There are others who are as aware as you are. Pollution will be corrected." Alice remembers seeing what looked like a living star map and a console of some kind. She recalled being amazed and delighted by being able to communicate telepathically so easily, and a little embarrassed that she didn't fully understand where the Milky Way was on the star charts. The next thing they both remember is waking up in bed the next morning with no idea how they got there. Alice said she nearly forgot the whole experience, but was able to remember, and both at first thought it might have been a dream, but they then began to compare notes and realized that their memories matched up. Alice insisted it really happened, and Frank eventually did too. Both of them were profoundly affected by this encounter in different ways. Prior to the event, Frank, as he said, had been somewhat depressed, but after this experience, his depression was gone, and he also felt that his awareness had been expanded to unbelievable degrees. As he says, "After that encounter, my whole concept of the universe changed. That's all they wanted to do, really, to enlighten me and expand my awareness." Alice says that she was physically affected. That tingling sensation in her abdomen persisted for a few days. She went to a medical clinic shortly after the experience and was told that she had a normal, healthy reproductive system. This really amazed her. Apparently her chronic problem was gone. And a few years later, she became pregnant. Now, during her pregnancy, she woke up one evening and did see strange lights outside the house. And as Alice says, "The next thing I knew, I was in the kitchen and the light was on in the living room. 45 minutes had elapsed since I saw the light out the window." Alice immediately realized what happened. She believed she was taken again, and she knew with an inexplicable certainty that her pregnancy was going to proceed as normal and that she would have a healthy child, which she did. She had no memories of being on board other than telling them that she would remember the encounter and them telling her that she would not remember. She couldn't recall anything other than this, but she remains convinced that she was healed of her medical condition in that first encounter by the ETs. That one is probably my favorite case because there are multiple witnesses, because they had a very friendly, benevolent encounter with the ETs, because both were able to hold long conversations. The woman was healed, It's truly an incredible account and very well researched by a professional UFO investigator. So cases again like these are very hard to deny. Clearly something very profound is going on here. So let's move to the next case. This one is extraordinary because although it does involve a single witness, this gentleman was able to hold a very long conversation with the ETs, and they provided him with volumes of information about them. They patiently answered all of his questions, and he had a lot of them. And they also volunteered all kinds of information about themselves as well. So this one I call Our Mission is One of Peace. This occurred on January 28, 1978 in Lago, Vichuquen, Chile. So this is an amazing case in so many different ways, and I think you'll find it quite interesting. This case was first published in the UFO forum, Comunidad Mystery Planet, but it also appeared in Albert Rosali's excellent volumes, Humanoid Encounters. The witness has insisted upon anonymity, but he did leave a lengthy first-hand testimony regarding his experience. The witness, I'll call him Fernando, that is a pseudonym, is apparently a company manager, a professional. At the time of his encounter, he had joined a group of people to hike in the Lake Vichuquen area of Chile. They went to the top of a large hill which overlooked the Pacific Ocean, very close to the town of Lago. After returning to camp, Fernando decided to take a hike alone back up the hill. He took his compass with him and a map. Weirdly, the compass didn't work. And it was around 7:30 p.m. on January 28, 1978. He had just started to return to camp from this hike when an intense blue light shone down on him from above. And as Fernando says, I was terribly frightened. I wanted to run away, to escape, but a kind of total paralysis took hold of me. And in a matter of seconds, I felt myself being pulled upwards into an immense body surrounded by lights, located about 8 or 10 meters above my head. I don't know how I was dragged into that object. So immediately Fernando found himself inside of a dome about 30 feet wide, metallic and shiny like stainless steel. He saw what looked like circular honeycombs on the wall, which were rotating around him. He also saw a giant machine, which kind of reminded him of a computer. 3 people were in front of him, 2 were standing, and 1 was sitting. And while they did look human and were of normal height and weight, they did have some differences. They had very pale complexions and were wearing cream-colored jumpsuits. The ones who were standing had a hood over their heads. All of them were wearing shiny black gloves and boots. They all had overly large, light-colored, and penetrating eyes. Now the one who was sitting was wearing a large belt. On the jumpsuit, Fernando could see what looked like 2 pockets on his chest, and one of them had a kind of shield-shaped emblem with 3 concentric rings inside. His head was covered with sparse, white blonde hair, and Fernando also noticed that these people moved slowly with incredible grace and elegance. And the one who was sitting instructed Fernando to sit next to him on this ledge on the side of this craft. The man's voice was deep and guttural, but still very calming. Fernando said he was still, quote, very scared. In fact, he said his hands were sweating and his heart was beating wildly. Says Fernando, they told me to calm down, that they wouldn't hurt me, that they just wanted to talk to me. They asked me many simple questions, such as what my name was, what I did, if I believed in life on other worlds, what my culture was, and if I knew anything about numbers, things like that. The man spoke very calmly, and Fernando began to relax enough to ask some questions himself. And this is when a lengthy conversation followed, during which Fernando learned many things about these people who had taken him. He has reconstructed the conversation to the best of his memory. So this is what Fernando remembers. He asked them, "Who are you?" And their reply was, "It's still early for you to know, but it won't be too late when everything becomes clear. In 1 or 2 more periods, full contact will be established between our peoples. You shouldn't be worried about the constant appearances of us in the skies of your planet. We do this so you will grow accustomed to our presence and there will be no panic when the ties of communication between us strengthen. Fernando asked them outright if they planned to invade Earth or destroy it, and they replied, "No, nothing of this sort. We are not warriors, nor are we driven by the desire for expansion. The universe is very large, too large for so few beings. Our mission is one of peace, as it has been for thousands of years." Fernando then asked them how their craft work, and the man replied, "We create our own flight field. The energy we accumulate, the creation of a magnetic field, in the application of directional coordinates, the use of submolecular reaction, has allowed us a scientific foundation far superior to what you have achieved. The waste of time on military research has resulted in a backwardness in the knowledge of Earthlings, which can hardly be overcome." So Fernando then asked, "Are you the only ones who have communicated with us?" And the man told him no, and that humans ignore a lot of the UFO activity on this planet. He said that they are able to travel interdimensionally, and he told Fernando that although he himself appeared to be about 40 to 45 years old, he was in fact 300 years old, and that thousands of years ago, people on Earth also used to live anywhere from 500 to 700 years, but that, quote, "You yourselves created the deteriorating environment and today can hardly live 100 years. So Fernando then asked them, "How long have you been observing us?" And the ET replied, "Humans have lived on Earth for thousands of years." He then explained that our technique of using carbon dating is flawed and incorrect. And he said, quote, "Life on this planet is very recent. All this time, we have accompanied the evolution of the inhabitants of Earth. Right now, our concern is greater than usual because the discovery and use of weapons that are too powerful and destructive, beyond the control of their uses, and entails not only the danger of the total destruction of this planet, but also a chain reaction that will endanger the entire solar system. The deviation of the Earth from its orbit would cause unforeseeable consequences." So Fernando then asked, "Has your presence left traces or evidence of your passage on Earth?" And the ET replied in the positive, yes, and said, "Humankind is only just beginning to properly direct their investigation into our presence here. We have perhaps left too much evidence of the existence of life on other planets, and more than this, we have left culture, instruction, and assistance that you have not been able to take advantage of. The case of the Egyptian pyramids is conclusive proof of this assertion. You have only just realized that they were not erected simply for the sake of it. The energy they can retain, guiding the other celestial bodies in space, the diagramming of their forms, what they bring with their construction contains teachings that would be immeasurable to you. It is necessary to search every corner of this planet for a series of traces and constructions superior to the scientific capacity of your time to understand and accept that other minds guided inexperienced hands." Now Fernando did notice many colors on the craft, colored lights, and he asked them, "Why do you use so many and such intense colors?" And the ET had a very interesting answer. The man said, "Because of the practical utility they provide. You must direct your studies towards the application of colors, the intensity of luminous fluxes, sounds, and the power of your minds. The essence is the wisdom and happiness that is given by nature itself, color, light, sound, and the human mind. Color and light have unlimited fields of application. They cure many illnesses, calm the nerves, prevent general imbalances, and provide inexhaustible strength and energy. Sound has almost identical applications, in addition to being an excellent cutting instrument and a powerful weapon when combined with other elements." Fernando then asked them if they had contacted other people than himself, and the ETs told him that yes, he was not the only one chosen. They said, "It happens that many who have been in contact with us and remained silent, forgetting our request to divulge certain messages. It seems to me that they were afraid of being considered crazy or not being believed. They told him that they contact many people for tests and exams, but, quote, none have been injured or harmed. Fernando asked them why they don't contact the leaders of the earth, and the ET said that doing so is difficult as leaders are surrounded and protected by many other people, but that they have in fact contacted at least 2 rulers and only one admitted to their existence. They said that many different types of ETs from different places are contacting the people of Earth, but that, quote, the mission is the same, to remind you that you must return your path to other goals and free yourself from bellicose ideas, worship your Creator, and obey His commandments, His laws. The arrogance with which many leaders guide you is leading you towards the destruction of everything established and will only provoke tragedy, which will affect other planets. Whatever path you take from now on, there will be a great catastrophe, but we wish to prevent it from being greater than you can imagine, destroying a large part of your inhabitants or destroying everything. The ETs then told him, we have analyzed every inhabitant on your planet in the same capsule you are now in. It is rare that we can be with someone who asks us questions, who is not afraid and does not despair. Your case is one of few, despite your great agitation. What we do not understand for our part is why the inhabitants of Earth cannot develop greater intellectual capacity and limits himself to using so little the capacity of the mind. The ETs said that their craft had been observed, captured on radar many times. They told him also that they are not much different from humans and also experience natural limitations. But at some point the conversation finally ended, and the next thing Fernando knew, he was back in his original location, and he estimates that the duration of this encounter was about 3 hours. Now, the witness's identity is apparently known to several prominent Chilean UFO researchers. They refer to him as, quote, an elite witness, because apparently he is of high standing and respected in the community. The witness himself has many questions about his own encounter, and does admit to the possibility that he may have dreamed the whole thing. The publisher of this case, Vanes, says that he got the information from, quote, the former Chilean delegation of the Cosmic Fraternity Studies Center. This was a short-lived Chilean UFO study group. A truly amazing case, and apparently thoroughly researched by Chilean investigators. And I can understand why the witness has elected to remain anonymous. Apparently he is a person of professional standing. But it's a shame. The ridicule and disbelief that surrounds this subject prevents the vast majority of people from going public. And we know it's a lot of people who are having this experience. And the messages this gentleman was given are very much corroborated by the many other people who are receiving these same kinds of messages, as we see in this one episode, which is only 5 cases. But here's another one, equally amazing, equally profound. I call this one a pure learning experience. This one occurred around July 1st, 1996 in Coates, Minnesota. This is a very small town. The main witness was driving with a friend through this area late at night when they came upon a UFO and of course had a period of missing time. They did recall it through hypnosis, but still a really compelling account that matches up perfectly with those who consciously recall their encounters. This is one of the reasons why we know hypnosis works. But I do think you'll find this case particularly fascinating. This last and final case comes from a gentleman. I call him Scott. That's a pseudonym. He sought hypnosis after having a scary missing time encounter. It was 2 a.m. on July 1st, 1996. Scott and his friend were driving to their home in Rochester, Minnesota. His friend was driving. Scott sat in the front passenger seat, and they were heading north on Highway 52 and had just passed through the small town of Coates. Without warning, something strange happened. As Scott says, I heard a low humming sound which got louder. I could feel a vibration all over my body. I looked out of the passenger window and I saw a bright light at treetop level about 200 feet away. So Scott shouted out, "Stop the car!" His friend stopped the car and seeing the UFO and humming noise became almost hysterical with fear. Scott, also afraid, grabbed a tire iron from under the seat and stepped outside of the car to take a closer look. As Scott says, "I got to the ditch, and that is the last memory I had. The next thing I remember was me and my friend pulling into a restaurant. We were both in a daze and couldn't figure out how the time got to be 5:30 a.m. So we had a large chunk of missing time. In fact, they were missing at least 3 hours of time. And beginning to research the subject, Scott decided that he would try regressive hypnosis. He found a hypnotist and scheduled a session, and under hypnosis, he was able to recall much of what happened during these missing 3 hours. He recalled the buzzing sound and the UFO. He remembered getting out of the car. He remembered standing by the side of the road and being hit by a blue beam of light, which actually levitated him over to the craft. He could see it had no visible windows. A ramp opened up and he was brought inside, and he found himself inside a strange room. As Scott says, a door opened and a tall gray and a normal-sized gray entered. The tall gray had on a black jumpsuit. Then a human entered, also wearing a black jumpsuit. He was smiling. At this point the man spoke, saying, quote, "There is no reason to be afraid. This is going to be a pure learning experience." Scott immediately found his fear dissipating. And as Scott says, he brought me into the cockpit area and told me to look outside the windows. The windows were one way, where I could see out, but the craft did not look like it had windows. He showed me the control panel and how to operate it. He took me into another room, where there were an assortment of monitors on the wall. The man spoke. "Follow along with the images," he said, "and they will teach you what you need to learn." So for the next 2 hours, Scott watched these images on these screens. He says he was somehow able to understand what he was watching, but apparently doesn't remember it in any detail. But the man then returned and said, quote, "It is vital that you understand these things, because there may come a time when we won't be here to teach you." They told him that he would have to continue, quote, "the big plan" in their place. And as Scott says, he said he didn't know when that time would be, as there are many factors involved that could change the outcome. Then, the two grays came back in the room and the ramp opened. The smaller gray escorted me out of the craft and to my car. He put a small device on the side of my head. I became paralyzed and my vision went black. So that's all Scott is able to recall. He did contact his friend after going under hypnosis. He learned that his friend had in fact been having flashbacks of this event, but that he, quote, "doesn't want to be involved in any way." There are many really interesting things about that case. Here we have a case of grays and apparently a human-looking ET working together. There are quite a few of those. I also found it interesting because they took the witness up to what we would call the control room, the helm, and were showing him how they fly the craft. This is another detail that turns up fairly consistently in these onboard UFO cases. But as you can see, these are the kinds of cases that do answer a lot of the questions. Over and over again, ETs are relating the same message. They're very worried about our warlike ways, clearly. They're very worried about how we are destroying the environment. These are the kinds of messages that are received over and over again. So really, the question is, will we listen? Will we take these messages seriously? Because we can see these things coming true right before our very eyes. It's one of the reasons I think these cases are so important. They're very interesting. I mean, they're incredibly fascinating. But I think they're very, very significant, very important. The ETs see that we are on the wrong path and are doing everything they can, short of coming down and taking over themselves, to correct things. So I think this argues for the benevolence of the onboard experience. I've said this many times. Yes, a close encounter can be incredibly terrifying, very traumatic, especially in the beginning. But most people do not feel that the ETs are evil or here to take over or intentionally hurt or harm people. And we can certainly see that in these onboard cases which follow a very set pattern. This is exactly what happens when people are taken on board. They're physically examined. Then they are perhaps given a tour of the craft. They are perhaps healed. They are given all kinds of information, which again involves these same kinds of messages and warnings. So this is something we have to take a good objective look at. So that's it, you guys. Thank you for joining me tonight on this amazing episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I hope you enjoyed it, perhaps learned something. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. And remember, stay tuned. There's a little additional segment where you get to hear the witnesses speak firsthand about the encounter that occurred in Minong, Wisconsin.
Time suddenly slipped away in the blink of an eye. Then there were 3 bright orange lights in the sky. Was it a trick? A hallucination? Well, the questions went unanswered until Karen saw a recent sightings report on alien abduction, and something about the story struck a resonant chord. Memories of that moonlit night in 1975 were incomplete, but strangely compelling. An engaged couple on a family vacation steal away for a quiet drive through the north woods of Wisconsin. There's something strange about that ride that they can't figure out, yet. Back at the cabin, the couple stroll down to the lake. The night is clear, there's a bright star, but then it moves, and they realize this is no star.
There was one star-like object. It was a little bit brighter than a star, kind of an orangey color that seemed to stand out from the others a bit. Just really didn't think anything of it at the time, but my focus kept going back and forth to that particular object. And after a while I noticed some odd things about it.
This bright orange star that was along the horizon of the trees on the other side of the lake zipped right to the top of our heads, and we looked up.
The stargazing couple were Karen Klinger and Dennis Morawska, and what they saw would haunt them for more than 20 years.
I think the best way I could describe the flight is like that of a dragonfly. It was just, it would zip here, stop, zip here, stop, zip, 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 zip really fast. And like, what are we watching? I was fascinated by it. I didn't want to stop looking at it. I was just glued to it. And we finally started calling my folks down from the cabin so they could watch. And my mother was a little scared.
The whole family got down to the lake in time to see the single light split into 3, then rejoin as one. It was a fascinating spectacle that drove one family member to try something illogical.
Jenny's sister's boyfriend went into the house and got a large beam flashlight and flashed at the UFOs 3 times. Suddenly they just completely disappeared. And about maybe a couple of seconds later, they flashed back at us the same amount of times as we had flashed at it.
After a few minutes of this strange communication, everyone reached the same impossible conclusion.
By this time we knew we were watching something that we had no explanation for, was really strange, and definitely appeared to be intelligently controlled.
The bizarre communication went on for half an hour. Then, in less than the blink of an eye, the UFO was gone. The encounter had a profound effect, but Karen and Dennis wouldn't know just how profound for another 2 decades. By then, they had married, had a son, and an acrimonious divorce. In fact, in 1994, they were barely speaking when Dennis and Karen met to exchange custody of their son.
Well, this particular evening, he got out of the car probably for the first time that he'd talked to me face-to-face in a year. And he knocks on the window of the car. And the first thing that comes out of his mouth was, "Have you ever considered hypnosis?" And I said to him, I said, "You saw that program."
The program was Sightings, and our report on the abduction experience of 4 men camping in the Allagash wilderness of northern Maine. They too had seen a UFO in the sky. Like Karen and Dennis, they had used a flashlight to signal the spacecraft. And most importantly of all, the Allagash 4 had missing time.
Around the lake, which is exactly a 4-mile radius, doesn't take very long to cover it all, that at one point we looked up and the moon was directly in line with the rear view mirror of the car. And by the time we got back to the lake, which shouldn't have been very long, the moon was setting.
It never occurred to me until that moment that there could possibly be some missing time involved. I felt sick. I literally felt nauseated at the thought of it.
But what happened during that missing time? Dennis asked Karen if she would consider hypnotherapy as a way to find the answer.
I think that the nature of a repressed memory is that there is no conscious access to this memory. It's not something that somebody remembers once or occasionally and then sticks back in a locked vault someplace in their mind.
Dr. David Clayton agreed to hypnotize Karen. He had no faith in the abduction experience, but as he worked with Karen, he realized that she was not unlike other patients who he'd seen relive past trauma under hypnosis.
Karen was recalling a very intense white light that approached the vehicle that she and her former husband were in at the time. And when this white light approached the side of the vehicle, it was so intense, I think Karen, at that point, felt that she had fainted.
Under Dr. Clayton's watchful eye, Karen revealed traumatic contact with extraterrestrial beings, something Dennis couldn't or wouldn't recall. But their descriptions of the craft were nearly identical.
We compared notes later. They corroborated very closely with some of the points that Karen had brought up under hers. We both got these images of a grid-like pattern, almost a primitive type structure, almost like a dirigible or something.
Independently, Karen and Dennis insisted that the purpose of the abduction was not to hurt them, but to help all humankind. They each felt compelled to deliver the same message. The fate of Earth is intertwined with alien worlds throughout the cosmos, and Earthlings are not doing a good job of taking care of our part of the universe. It's a message that abduction support group leader Mary Kerfoot hears a lot.
As far as the phenomenon in general, some people's experiences can truly be described as abductions. They are taken kicking and screaming, struggling against their will. Others evolve over time as they understand what is happening to come very cooperatively and become associated with the beings that they're working with in a participatory role.
The Chicago Center for Encounters support group was formed in 1993, so abductees and experiencers would know that they are not alone.
It's enormously exciting for the members of our support group to compare experiences, because as soon as you find someone who has some aspect that is similar or exactly like yours, you feel much more validated.
At first, abductees were pariahs, oddballs, inventing a new mythology. But after 3 decades, the phenomenon is not going away because, abductees insist, alien contact is a reality.
If you feel that this has happened to you, by all means do whatever it takes to uncover the information, because it's worth the risk.
Just as she was reassured after watching our Allagash abduction report, Karen Klinger hopes that her personal story will encourage more people to come forward, or at least to seek help from a certified professional hypnotherapist, or from one of the hundreds of support groups forming around the world.